Senior manager has been the hardest grade for me so far. It's the first time that work felt like a chore, which is just completely against my work ethos. Talk about this in the episode, and I also share the other main things that I learned from my time being senior manager before becoming a director. Some of these things are things that people wouldn't usually share, but here we are. You're listening to episode 99 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps tax professionals to progress, develop, and improve their careers.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. This episode is where I'm sharing what I learned from my time being a senior manager in employment taxes for an accountancy firm. From the intro, it may have sounded like it was all bad, but that really isn't the case. I had a huge shift in confidence as my time as senior manager. I felt like I could just deal with any client work, any query, without any worry, and that I'd be able to sort things out. And it's also the grade where I properly felt like I was completely fine with running client meetings by myself, or at least leading them anyway. I also got to see the two extreme ends of staff performance, the really good and the really bad, and I made two new life friends from people in my team. But it was overall the least enjoyable chapter of my career so far, and you'll hear about that in the episode later on. When I was thinking about what I'd learned from my time being senior manager, I ended up creating a pretty big list, but when looking at them, some of them were quite bland and not that impactful or interesting. Some I covered closely enough in the equivalent episode from my time being manager, which is episode 40 of the podcast, and some that I listed were just much more interesting, big hitters than the others, so I focused mainly on the ones that I think are going to be more interesting and the ones people don't usually talk about, at least from my experience anyway. Rough timings for each section of the episode can be seen in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP99 or by going to the details section of the episode within your podcast player of choice. Broadly speaking, the sections of the episode are to do with whether results alone are enough to get you promoted, that striving purely for results can make you unhappy. There's a section on delegation, and there's two sections related to winning work. I did go back and listen to the manager episode 40, and I really can't believe how much worse the episodes were back then. But fortunately, I think what I said in that episode still has value, so you may also be interested in that episode too. And if you listen to the last episode, episode 98, you'll know that I decided to move firms for the director promotion, and you'll know why I did that if you listen to it. I've had a few nice messages about that episode, so if you haven't listened to it yet, maybe give it a listen. The next episode is episode 100, which is just a huge milestone for the podcast. It's crazy when I think I've been doing the podcast now for that long. It's at least 500 plus hours pumped into just creating episodes alone. And what I'm going to do for episode 100 is I'm going to give an overview and an insight into what my career has looked like so far to date, so that you can see what a tax career can look like over the first 10 years or so of that. My main aim for the podcast this year is to increase listenership, and you can help with that by being connected to me on LinkedIn and liking, commenting on, or sharing my posts, as doing those things increases the reach of them and gets the podcast in front of more people. So if you can do one thing from this episode, please head on over to my LinkedIn page, a link to which will be in the show notes, and go to the activity section of my page and hit like, leave a comment, or share the post right into this episode.
Hi, I'm Maisie from Pro Tax Recruitment, and we are proud to sponsor the Tax Professionals podcast. At Pro Tax, we help tax professionals like you to find new roles that are a great fit to you, to find that perfect candidate to add to your team, and everything else in between. We focus solely on tax recruitment, and this allows us to give you current, informative insights into the tax market, helping you to make well-informed decisions. Head on over to the taxprofessionalspodcast.com/pro-tax to see our latest tax roles and our team, all of whom would be happy to speak to you.
Thanks to Pro Tax for sponsoring the podcast. Kevin Racher at Pro Tax actually placed me in my last firm, and that's where I stayed for 7 years, progressing from tax assistant up to senior manager. So if you do want to get in touch with Pro Tax but you're unsure who to contact, I can suggest getting in contact with Kevin. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. The first lesson is that great results alone aren't necessarily enough to get you the promotion that you deserve at the point in time that you deserve it. Probably about a year into being senior manager, I had my eye on the director promotion, and I was thinking, what do I need to do to really guarantee that promotion? And I thought that if we had a really good billing year, that I won a lot of work, delivered a lot of work, was responsible for managing and delivering a lot of work, then that could result in the team having a good year, and that if we were at or above our budget, that would really strengthen my case to get the director promotion. And there came a point in time where, just from some conversations that I had, I started to realise that that wasn't going to be enough by itself. So I started having conversations with the partner on my team to understand like what it was that I needed to do, any gaps that I had in order to get that director promotion. Had about 3 conversations, I think, where the intention was good on both sides. Like, the point of it was to understand like what needed to be done by me to get that director promotion. But whilst the conversations were nice and I felt like I was understanding and that in the moment, when I came away and reflected on those chats, I just didn't really have any more clarity like on what it is that I needed to do. And because of that, I thought I'm just gonna, see if any other firm out there would, I suppose, offer me the director promotion. So I reached out to one firm that I'd had conversations with in the past, PK Smith Cooper. We picked up those conversations, and whilst I was like in the process of speaking to them, which was over about 4 or 5 different meetings or interviews with them, if you'd like to call it that, they're more informal, but most people probably still class them as interviews. So as I was going through the process with them, I had a meeting with the partner of my team, and there was an agreement between us in the end that I was already operating at director level. At least that was my understanding of the conversation, and that January 2024 would be the right time for me to have that promotion. I knew the other partner was going to have to go speak to other people in the firm and kind of get their buy-in before it could be put in stone. But my understanding of that conversation was that the right point in time for me to get that director promotion was January 2024. The reason I know that that was my understanding is because straight after that conversation with the partner, which was towards the end of the day, I went straight downstairs and I talked to my wife about it because I was happy that I'd finally got the clarity that I needed and I had the agreement to the promotion. But for some reason, I just had a feeling that something might happen with that, or that it might not go through by January 2024. And so in that meeting, I told the partner that I was going to continue my discussions with Smith Cooper, because I thought it's already quite far down the line at that point, and why not? And it's also a safety net if something happened with the promotion getting put through. And then, long story short, the promotion at Danes didn't happen in January 2024. It was obviously disappointing for me to hear that, but I had really good results in that year. I was on a 4-day week, and I was winning between 300 and 400k of work in that, and delivering, or managing the delivery of around the same number. So like the numbers were good for a firm of the size that I was working for. So it was really gutting to have that promotion not put through at the time that I thought I deserved it. So what this made me realise is that like you can have really good results, but they aren't necessarily enough alone to get the promotion that you deserve at the point in time that you deserve it. Because there are things that are outside of your power that can stop a promotion, even if the results are good. So for example, you might not fit the exact mold that they want you to fit for that grade. So the firm you work for might have an image in their head of what a director looks like, and you just might not fit that for whatever reason. And your strengths might not be valued as much as they should, and they focus more on, say, the areas that you're not so good at because that's what they value for that type of role. Maybe you're too young, maybe you're seen as a threat, maybe the senior team doesn't see you as part of their like club at this point in time, so they don't want to invite you into the senior team. There's lots of reasons, I suppose, that are outside of your power that, even if you have good results, can stop promotion going through. So I suppose the moral of the story for anyone is, if you do want to be promoted, as soon as you can, you need to start trying to figure out exactly what it is that you need to get that promotion. Because if you don't, you can end up spending time doing things that you think are going to help, but won't necessarily, even if you focus on getting really good results. And at the end of the day, what you might need to do is consider a move, or you might need to move to get the promotion that you deserve at the point in time that you need it. So don't rule that out entirely. So the second lesson that I want to share with you is that if you focus solely on results, you can actually make yourself miserable. So let me tell you this from my perspective, and it's a slight over-exaggeration by saying it makes you miserable, because I wasn't miserable, but it was certainly the least enjoyable time in my career, and I kind of know how I got there. So I'd been applying this approach that I'd learned from a book called The One Thing, something I've talked about before in the past on the podcast. And basically, my one thing objective. So I had one overall goal that I was working towards, which was to get that director promotion by a certain point in time. I'm pretty sure I was always aiming for April 2024. Can't remember now because I haven't got the data anymore, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure it was April 2024. So I was working towards that goal for a long time. And so every single month I would sit down and think, okay, what do I need to achieve this month to make sure that I get the director promotion by that point in time? And then each week I would sit down and be like, okay, what do I need to do this week to make sure that I can achieve those monthly goals, so that I can achieve that overall goal of being a director by that certain point in time? And so I was focusing for a long time on things that I thought were going to get me that director promotion. Even if it meant I had to do things that I didn't particularly enjoy, that's what I was doing. And so I ended up spending so much time doing tasks and doing things, doing activities that I didn't enjoy doing. And the stuff that I did enjoy doing had become such a minimal amount, potentially even like zero in some weeks. So all the elements of the job that I enjoyed doing had just been compressed and minimized entirely. And I ended up going through 2 massive periods of stress, I think, as a result of this, where I was stressed for a month straight, pretty much every single day, including on weekends. And that stress was pretty much always there in the background. So it was 2 horrible periods that I had. And I just ended up not enjoying work as much anymore because I was just spending so much time on things that I didn't like. I wasn't doing anything really that I enjoyed much at work anymore. Slight exaggeration because still there was, of course, some things there, but like pretty much felt like I wasn't doing the things that I enjoyed anymore. So in the end, what I ended up doing is I just had to flip it on its head because I could see that I wasn't enjoying it, that I was losing the motivation, that I was losing the desire to work, because some mornings I'd be waking up thinking, I cannot be bothered for this day ahead, like I just can't, I wasn't feeling it. So what I ended up doing was I created a list that had tasks that I really, really enjoyed doing, things that I really, really enjoyed doing from a work perspective, and I had that list. Had a list of tasks that was like, all right, that I didn't mind doing per se, and I had a list of things that I really didn't like doing. And I started in my like monthly and weekly sit downs, I was thinking about like what I needed to achieve. I started focusing on making sure that I had at least X amount of time spent doing tasks that fell in the column that I really enjoyed, and I minimised stuff that was in the column that I didn't enjoy. And so I did that rigidly for probably like maybe 3-4 months in the end, and it really did bring the enjoyment back for me. So what I suggest is that you don't focus solely on results at the expense of your happiness and enjoyment of work, because if you end up getting to a position like I did where you're just not enjoying it anymore, then you're just going to lose the motivation, you're going to lose the desire to want to progress, to get better. And so I think it's much better in hindsight to make sure that that I was still doing enough things that I enjoyed so that I kept that motivation, that I kept that desire. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Don't be an idiot like me. Focus too much on results at the expense of your own enjoyment of work. I couldn't really do an episode on what I'd learned for being senior manager without covering delegation to at least some degree, because senior manager is that grade where you need to change your mindset really in order to start delegating more, to free up your time to spend time in different areas that maybe others in the team can't because they currently don't have the skill level or the experience or whatever it is. So you really need to take advantage of delegation as a senior manager, particularly if you want to move on to the next grade. So kind of first lesson number 1 in relation to delegation is that you can be the best delegator in the world, but if you're delegating to the wrong people, so people who don't currently have the capability to do the work that you're delegating to them, it's never going to work. So what do I really mean by this then? There was a few times where I'd like handed over like entire projects to other people to complete all the documentation, all the reviewing, all the outputs of pretty much everything. And I would sit down with them up front and I would go through my delegation checklist that made sure that I gave them all the information that they needed to do a good job of that piece of work. But there was one thing that I wasn't really considering properly, and that was what's their current capability? What are they currently capable of, even if it's a stretch in their capability? I just thought that if I sat down with them and I explained to them what they needed to do, what my expectations were, that everything would just be rosy and they'd be able to produce this amazing piece of work. So even though delegation is definitely a skill that can be learnt and you get better at, if you're delegating to the wrong people, you're always going to end up in disaster. So you need to make sure that you only delegate bits of work that are within their capability. So rather than delegating a full project to them, could I delegate part of that project for them and then help them and support them with that, help them get better at that, let them build upon their experience and knowledge like bit by bit before I get to a stage where I can hand the full project to them. And also kind of the second delegation lesson is that you should really start delegating as like the first port of call rather than a last resort. So rather than only delegating when you're too busy to get to things, you should delegate regardless of how busy you are. Just think instead like, I have all these things I've got on, what can I delegate, rather than thinking, what can I do and not do, and therefore I have to delegate the stuff that I can't do. This is important because otherwise you'll end up always becoming really busy and getting distracted by things that aren't necessarily important. Whereas if you delegate things as a first port of call, then you're going to have more available time to do the important things that you might not necessarily otherwise get to do. And you also then, when you're delegating work like that, you're giving other people in your team the chance to work on certain things, giving them a chance to learn, get better, giving them the experience. And so pretty much it's a win-win, because the way that you build a stronger, better team is by having good people in it, and the way that you can get good people in it is by making sure they get the chance and experience to grow and develop. The last thing I'll leave you then on a delegation point is I'd never come across this concept before being senior manager and being told it by a colleague that used to work in a Big Four, and it's the concept of upward managing. So upward managing is, I'm going to probably butcher this to be honest, but it's to do with where the person that you're working with, that you're delegating to, can they manage you? Can they manage your expectations? Can they make sure that they tell you that things are on track by being proactive? Can they meet their deadlines? Or if they're not going to be able to for some reason, that they let you know and they communicate to you in advance, that they potentially act proactively and take initiative to solve problems rather than just come to you with the problem. So really anything to make the manager's life more easy, so rather than more difficult. So because I've probably not done a good job of explaining that, I can suggest that you have a look at it online or something. There's lots of information out there about upward management. But really what you need to do early on, I think, is teach your staff how to upward manage properly. Because for the first time in my career, I've worked with someone, as a senior manager, I worked with someone that was exceptionally good at upward management. And honestly, it made my life so much easier as a delegator. So just think teaching that skill to people, which, supposedly they do in the Big Four from an early stage, is if you can teach that skill of upward managing, it will just be an absolute breeze. And just think delegation will go much more smoothly from that point onwards.
To see our latest tax roles at ProTax, along with our friendly team who's more than happy to speak to you, head on over to the taxprofessionalspodcast.com/pro-tax.
This next lesson is probably somewhat opinion rather than fact, but at least in my opinion and from my experience, current clients and current contacts are the best place to start when it comes to winning new tax work. So over the course of time of me being senior manager, I had 12 clients really that I really considered as my clients, and I had good relationships with every one of these 12 clients. 10 of them were in the recruitment sector, 2 of them were non-recruitment sector, but I had this core of 12 clients that I had really strong relationships with. And on a 4-day week, I was winning about between, I can't remember the exact numbers because I don't have the data unfortunately, but I was winning between 300k and 400k of work in a year on a 4-day week. And pretty much all of that work was coming from those 12 clients. I know it's tempting to think that the more clients that you have, the more work that you can win, or the more contacts that you have, or the more networking you do, the more people you get in front of. But the thing is current clients, they're more willing to pick up the phone to you. They're more willing to answer the phone when you call them. They're more willing to respond to your emails. They're more willing to listen to you. They're more willing to take on board any comments that you say, because they have that trust and relationship with you. So they're just more willing to interact with you and take on board what you're saying. Whereas someone that you don't have a good relationship with, it's just going to be much more difficult to do that. So, there could be some of those clients in there where I'd be to them, I could just ring them up and be like, there's this opportunity where you could save probably 50k a year. Do you want me to talk you through it? And they'd probably be like, yeah, great, let's talk through it. And then that could be a 10, 15k piece of work, So that's the luxury that you have when you have these good relationships with people. So how did I kind of get to the point of creating these strong relationships with these people, and how did I suppose, get that amount of work from how did I win that amount of work from working with such a small amount of clients, I suppose, overall? So I managed to get quite a lot of those clients onto retainers. So they paid a monthly fee and they got a certain amount of things in return for paying that monthly fee. And within the retainers, I always put in a certain amount of meetings with them per year. And they also had ad hoc advice calls as included as part of it. So they weren't worried to pick up the phone to me if they wanted to ask me just a simple question, or they were okay sending me a quick email asking me a question because they knew that they weren't going to get a charge for that. And the regular meetings just meant that I was touching base with them at least a few points a year. Whenever there was kind of something topical, whether it was particularly an employment tax topic or whether it was in the recruitment sector, I would update them by emails, I would get them on calls or something along those lines, and I would just give them the information. So I was, I suppose, taking any excuse I could to have a conversation, to have an interaction with that client so that they could keep me in their mind and that I could continue building that relationship with them and giving them a good client service overall. Whenever I went into meetings with them, I always had a little think beforehand about like what other services could we potentially be supporting them with that would be beneficial to this client. So then when I was having that meeting with them, I would bring those things up. And the reason I think it's good to do that is because when you're in a meeting with someone or when you're already talking to someone, it's very easy to start talking to them about other things. You obviously don't want to detract from the main purpose of the meeting or the discussion that you're having, but you can add as a by the way, or you can ask them if they want to talk about other things in that meeting and then talk to them about it. It's much easier to do that when you're in a meeting than it is trying to call them, to get them on the phone, to then talk to them about it. It's much easier than trying to set up a meeting, particularly to talk about those things. When you're already talking to them, you can just talk about these extra things as well. And when I was talking to them as well, whether it was meetings, calls, or whatever, I would always keep an open mind and be like almost watching out for other opportunities or other ways that I could further help them. So as I say, like that was 12 clients that I had really good relationships with, really. I actually listed them and counted them just to see which ones I considered the ones I had really good relationships with, where a lot of work came from. And 10 of them were in the recruitment sector, 2 of them non-recruitment sector. But having that recruitment sector specialism did make it much easier to have these catch-up calls and just pick up the phone to them, because what I could do is, for example, I could talk to them about what I'm seeing in the recruitment sector at the moment. I could talk to them about the HMRC activity that I was seeing in the recruitment sector and other general things in the sector. And that is information that they were always interested in hearing about. So it meant that I didn't just have to have conversations with them about, a tax topic, which for most clients would just be boring, something they wouldn't be interested in. So it meant I could just talk to them about all these different things in a way that was interesting to them and beneficial to them. So the last lesson I'm going to leave you with is, again, probably somewhat subjective, but in my opinion, people buy from people, not firms. At least generally speaking, of course, there's going to be exceptions, like some of the big four out there have got reputations that just mean that people are going to want to go and purchase services from them. But in the main, people buy from people, not firms. The reason that I mention this is because I'm pretty active on LinkedIn because of the fact that I run the podcast mainly. I mean, I browse it anyway, and I would have done without the podcast. I would have commented, I would have liked, I would have shared things, but I wouldn't be posting as much if it wasn't for the podcast. And what the podcast and me posting on LinkedIn has allowed me to do is, I suppose, build a personal brand. I mean, it's cliche and it's jargon, it's buzzwordy to describe it that way, but I think that's what's ended up happening as a result of it. I've got a personal brand, and so for the first time, I suppose ever, in my time as senior manager, I actually started getting some work opportunities, some tax work opportunities as a result of running the podcast and for people knowing me. So one of my last pieces of work at my last firm was on a contingent fee, but as long as HMRC would agree that the tax saving that we were saying was due was actually due, then the total fee for that piece of work was going to be around 25k, which is pretty good considering that I haven't gone out there trying to win tax work from the podcast or LinkedIn, etc. There was someone else that I met through the podcast that knew me well, that I spotted an opportunity for, as in terms of how they could help their clients potentially save hundreds of thousands of pounds in employers' national insurance each year. And unfortunately, it never ended up paying off. But, that opportunity again came from the fact that I'd had this personal brand and that people wanted to potentially work with me based on what they knew about me from being out there on LinkedIn and through doing the podcast. And I did have another opportunity as well to do with some R35 work. Unfortunately, it didn't end up paying off, but that's 3 distinct opportunities that I've got where it's just because of kind of that awareness, I suppose, that I built around myself because of the podcast, because of posting on LinkedIn. So, and those people, if they did purchase, would have purchased because of me, not because of the firm that I worked for at the time. And actually, what's ended up being really good is that opportunity I talked about where there's 25k worth of work, as long as HMRC was agreeable to the tax saved. That actually led to me being put in contact with about 3 or 4 other people that would want a similar service, and that could result in more work. And that all came from, I suppose, people wanting to work with me as a person rather than work for the firm that I worked for. So just something to bear in mind is that whenever you're thinking about selling services or maybe doing marketing or whatever, is think about the fact that people want to buy from you. So get your personality out there. There's going to be people that will love working with you. There's going to be people out there that don't like working with you. But you need to find those people that do like working with you, because ultimately that's going to be a better relationship on both sides then, and something you're going to enjoy more. In summary then, for this episode, great results alone aren't necessarily enough to get you the promotion that you deserve at the point in time that you deserve it. So figure out what you need to do to get the promotion. Know there are things outside of your power and control, and that you might need to make a move to get what you deserve. If you focus solely on results and just start doing tasks that you don't like and really minimize doing the tasks that you do like, you can actually end up making work unenjoyable and not fun anymore, which is exactly what I did for a period of time when I was senior manager. When it comes to delegation, you need to delegate work that's within the capability of the person that you're delegating to and not outside of their capability, although it could be within their stretch capability. And you should also aim to delegate as the first port of call and not as a last resort, because otherwise you can just become overly busy and the blocker. And by delegating as a first point of call, you're going to help give your team that experience, give your team that opportunity to learn things and to grow and get better. And last of all, you want to, and last of all, in terms of delegation, I recommend that you teach your staff how to upward manage well. Current clients and contacts are the best place to start, in my opinion, when it comes to winning new work. So this is where I suggest you focus your efforts, even if you haven't spoken to this client or contact in a while. And last but not least, in my opinion at least, people buy from people, not firms. Yes, there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, people buy from people and not firms. So build good relationships with people and potentially start working on your personal brand as soon as you can. Show notes for this episode can be accessed at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP99. There's a link in the show notes to episode 40 of the podcast, which is the key learnings from my time as manager. And there's also a link to the last episode, which is why and how I left my role, my tax role and firm after 7 years of working there. If you want to improve your tax research or advisory skills, then you might be interested in my masterclasses in these areas that make doing both of these things less difficult, allowing you to enjoy work more, and also helping you to accelerate your progression. Link to the masterclasses is in the show notes. As you heard in the episode, my main goal for the podcast this year is to increase listenership by heading on over to my LinkedIn profile and either liking or commenting on or sharing my LinkedIn posts. You will help with that because it gets the post in front of more people and therefore gets the podcast in front of more people. So if I could ask you to do one thing after listening to this episode, it would be to like, comment on, or share the post that I put out there which announces this episode. That would be much appreciated. If you like this episode, you can get notifications of all future episodes of the podcast by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. Episodes are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for the episode. Hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop, improve your career. Until next time.